Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really delighted to welcome those of you in the room and the many of you online. So welcome to our event today, looking at the wonderful report that we've just co-produced with Everbridge and the UCL Warning Research Centre, From Policy to Practice, Case Studies in Resilience and Public Warning. I'll just get rid of this sign here. Okay, there we go. Hopefully now everyone can see the screen properly. So we're really delighted to have you here, and we're going to have a good session today where we're going to have a number of different speakers who are going to be talking about different aspects of the report and give us an overview of it. And hopefully we'll have some good Q&A and discussion as well. So, but first of all, I'd like to introduce Dave Wagner, who is going to be our first speaker, who is the CEO of Everbridge. And he's had over 30 years of working in the software business. And he's going to give us a really great insight based on his experience to put this into context. So Dave, I will pass over to you.
Well, thank you, Karina. Really, I want to focus on expressing, my appreciation for the authors and my appreciation to the University College of London for your partnership in preparing this report. And then I want to talk a little bit about the importance of this report. So, I have a sincere appreciation for the work that's been done to bring this report together. I've had an opportunity to read it carefully, and I want to just emphasize the value of this kind of work. At Everbridge, our mission is keeping people safe, and everybody who works in emergency management and public warning and emergency response around the world, we share this mission of keeping people safe. And from my perspective, it's a very high honor to be a part as a technology provider, as a part of this ecosystem that's working to enhance people's safety around the world. We're in a great position here at Everbridge where our technology can reach 2 billion people on the planet. That means there's still 6 billion people who can't be reached. We're in a great situation with our technology that we have, the best, cell broadcast technology in the world. But there's a lot more technology that can be brought to bear to keep people safe. And the other thing we think about at Everbridge is this idea of together, we are building a more resilient world. And so that's our second mission, keeping people safe. And then together, we are building a more resilient world. And together we is really important. I talked about the strong mission, purpose-driven people that engage in this emergency safety work. And it takes all of us together. It takes researchers, it takes technologists, it takes practitioners, it takes local government, statewide governments, national government, it takes international cooperation to make this ecosystem of partnerships work so that together we are building, is the second part of this tagline. So our building, from my perspective, ties to the fact that we're early on in applying technology to people's safety. And there's so much opportunity moving forward to do an even better job. And that ties me to the importance of this report. Having a report that outlines in one comprehensive place a summary of the best practices around the world has a lot of value for our practitioners in other countries who've not yet to investigate public warning technologies, for people who have implemented public warning technologies and want the opportunity to learn from one another. A comprehensive project like this one to summarize the best practices and make those available can accelerate the availability of life-saving technology all around the world. And so I hope you take a moment to celebrate what this report means, what it means in terms of our building side of a more resilient world. And then I know you all talk about this a lot, but what does a more resilient world look like? a more resilient world looks like a place where we're interconnected and have a higher ability to help one another. We see forward at Everbridge a world where governments and enterprises alike are communicating much more carefully with their citizens and constituents during times of crisis, so that they can be safe and they can respond in a way that is optimal for their current situation. And there's so much we've been doing in this area and so much more that we can do to build a more resilient world where people are safe, they feel cared for, they feel that they're able to care for others and share information. And so it's a real privilege here at Everbridge to be a part of this ecosystem. And I want to thank again everybody at University College London, the authors of the paper, and all who contributed for this really meaningful piece of work that's been done, that I'm confident is going to help keep people safe globally and definitely takes us further along on this journey of together building a more resilient world. So thank you all very much for being here today. And Karina, back over to you.
Thank you so much, Dave. That was a great overview. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us that great perspective. We really appreciate it. So now what I want to do is just give a bit of a perspective from the UCL side about the value of this report, which is really great. So my name is Karina Fernley. I am the director of the UCL Warning Research Centre, and my main interest is in warnings and science communication. So you'll see that my interest is really about this. How do we actually communicate that science? So as you can see from this cartoon here, you can see that we have got a lot of there we go. Communication here about like different hazards and how we actually communicate. So it's really important that as part of this work, we've been really thinking about that communication first and foremost. So we at the UCL Warning Research Centre are one of the first dedicated warning research centres in the world, looking at warnings both in terms of natural and human-made hazards. And we have an expertise from all around the world. We have around 30 odd UCL members who are interested in working in warnings. And we have about 40 affiliates from all around the world, bringing their expertise both on different geographies and social and livelihood contexts. And we want to cut across the different vulnerabilities, the different disasters and the different risks to find new ways of doing things. And part of that builds on existing literatures, but also it means reframing what we think about warnings and also putting research into practice, which is what academia strives to do. But equally, what we want to do is put practice into research. So what do the people who are using warning systems need, and how can we help support that with academic research? So we have a number of different collaborators and partners and researchers that we work with, and we've produced a number of different reports looking at different aspects. But really, the important part is that we have been working with Everbridge for quite a while now. So we held a conference last year called Creating Effective Warnings for All, of which Everbridge was our sponsor, and also produced a marvellous video of the event, which you can find on our website too, which gives a bit of an overview of the event. And we not only organise academic conferences, we also do teaching, research, training, website, information and resources, and social media. So really what we're trying to do is create a hub, create an interest around warnings. And this really has led us to where we are today with Everbridge, which is so important because Everbridge are the ones who are providing warnings to millions of people around the world. On this report, I basically stated that it's really vital that countries develop warnings and build resilience for their work, for their political, economic, and cultural contexts. It's so important that it works and is relevant for those communities and works with those infrastructure and their own languages and their own capacity to even be able to not just receive the message, but act on it and be able to believe it as well. The big thing at the moment is believing what we see or hear on the internet. So this report really provides refreshing insights into how to enhance public-private partnerships with government and academic research and provide digestible takeaway points to build on. And that's really at the heart of what we want to do, is to be able to give those takeaway points that people can actually use and act on. So Everbridge is a wonderful partner to work with because they are the one who do the critical work. They are the ones that have the skills and the expertise, and they are the ones working within the business sector and engaging with all sorts of different stakeholders and companies to make warnings actually happen. As you can see here, this is the sort of general system here of the critical events. Everbridge does their magic here and make sure that everyone gets their warnings through various different channels. And for that, that also requires technical development and keeping on top of an ever-growing technological advancement, as well as an investment. And so this report really shows and demonstrates the collaboration we can bring together as a research and as an implementing company to really review and enhance what we're doing. And this is important internationally because we have so many different initiatives in place to help support and well, make sure that people are safe. So we have the early warning for all, which was announced by the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres in 2022, which is basically the premise of it is that everyone in the world should have access to an early warning system. So clearly technology plays a huge role in that in terms of being able to access many populations around the world, either through smartphones or just basic phones. So this is like a massive interest globally at the moment. And this, of course, feeds into the Sendai framework, and we have the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris 2015 agreements. So essentially, we're all working together to make sure that those warnings are reaching the right people and protecting them. And it's taking a lot of work. And the reason it's taking a lot of work is because we have to work across borders. We have to work across different institutional silos, across different government silos. We have to deal with the fact that different populations have different access to technology. We have the problem that technology is amazing when it works, but when it doesn't work, it's a problem, right? So we have to try and think about and can technology be the answer to the failure of technology? That's the really important thing as well. So there's a big international focus on warnings at the moment. And this is just an article that I published recently with a colleague of mine, Andrew Tupper. And really this article is talking about how we need to work together to achieve these goals, how we across all the different sectors need to achieve warning for all. The UN can't do it on its own. It doesn't have the capacity and the resources. It sets the agenda, and we all need to come in and work on it together. And this report is part of that process in terms of working towards that agenda. So thank you very much for coming today. And we're really excited to hear more about the report from the authors. But before I do that, I will pass you over to Lorenzo Marchetti, who is the head of the Global Public Affairs at Everbridge. So I'll just pass over the microphone to you, Lorenzo.
Let me just say a couple of words. And the first one is thank you, Karina. Thank you to UCL, to the Warning Research Center. We have been at this point partnering together for over a year. We have been doing something that I consider amazing for the future of technology, for the future of early warnings, for the future of partnerships in general, because we are testing together new ways of doing very interesting things. And I am very glad to have found a partner like you last year through the conference and today presenting this report. I won't steal a lot of your time. I'd rather you listen to the authors. I want to just say a couple of things about the report, is why this report is here with us today, why are we launching it? Well, because we think it's crucially important, as simple as that. Everbridge is not just a technology company. We are a technology company that deals in security. Our main goal is really to protect people and to make sure that business flows, for example, keep running. What does it mean? That, as our CEO said, we live in an ecosystem and we understand our role in this ecosystem very well. The only way to look at the future is to understand what kind of technology can be applied and where. When we say we keep people safe, we don't talk about just some people, we talk about every person on Earth. It's a very ambitious goal, if you like, but it's something we really believe and we try and we struggle every day to achieve. So why the report is, through being important, what we think is that this is the first step in a path that can lead us into something that is a more secure world. Why do I say that? Because by choosing the geographical areas that we chose, that are Japan, United States, and Europe, we started to delineate a trajectory. As you will see, there are common themes, there is diversity in these systems, there are diversity in policies, there is diversity in technology applied, but they have the same goal. So what is very useful for us is to understand why is technology developing in a certain way and why policies either react or go before this kind of the change in technology. Clearly, we chose 3 countries or institutions, if we think about the European Union, not by chance, but because they gave us an historic opportunity of for analysis. Japan has been at the forefront of technology implementation, for example, for tsunami warning, earthquakes. The European Union serves always as a great role model for regulation. How do the great regulator work on policies that are as important as the ones that are meant to keep people safe? And the United States is, the innovator, always bringing on new models to apply in policies, in politics sometimes, and also in technology. So from what we consider be theory, which started really to think about the trajectory. And this trajectory is very important for practitioners like the ones we help, like us to an extent. Because really, if we start to focus on this example and slowly we expand to other areas of the world, there is a lot that can be done. And there is a lot in which we can invest to look at the future in a way in which it is really protective of every person. So I take this moment, the launch of the report, as a first really step. I'm glad that our CEO already shared some of the vital information about why we are behind this. I'm really glad to be here with Karina, that is an amazing colleague, an amazing expert. And I'm actually very happy to see Miriam and Marley presenting today, because I've seen the passion behind this project. Marley has been working on it since mid-August, and she's been compiling information, putting it together, rewriting, and it was amazing. And then when Miriam joined us, we really found someone that had the ideas to bring everything to fruition, and it is a pleasure to see the result. I invite you all to download the report, to read it. 83 pages for you is nothing, I know. There is also a booklet, but I won't share that unless you downloaded the whole thing. And I want to know what you think. I hope you will get as much out of it as much as we think you can, because this is really the first step. And let's not take any more of the time of our audience. And should I introduce who is the first one? Miriam, right? Yes. Miriam, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, and guide us through.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thanks to Karina and Dave also for the wonderful overview. I'm going to share my screen here. Just one moment, if you bear with me, please. So thank you again for the introduction. I will go ahead and provide an overview of the report, and what we did in terms of the research and putting it all together. So we examined each of the key markets that Lorenzo and Karina and Dave mentioned, and how they approach resilience differently, especially with regards to their frameworks and policies that they put in place to reduce and manage risks. And we did that by doing a review of legislation and policies on environment, disaster risk reduction, resilience, and warnings. And Marley did the bulk of the research, and it was an incredibly difficult task, especially since Japan, for example, most of their policies and reports are written in Japanese, and she's fluent in Japanese. So really well done on that. And then we also used a variety of different indices to assess and compare the strengths and gaps of each country, really to look at the best practices, what is still needed, and what are the gaps. So we've come up with 5 key takeaways from this report that the booklet that Lorenzo mentioned has, as well as the report. And one of the first ones is that we've come, very far in advancing in warning systems. However, many people around the world are still not reached by initiatives. And we know that early warning information systems are an important cornerstone of disaster risk reduction and preparedness. And one of the major lessons in the disaster risk reduction community is that disaster impacts are due in large part to failing to take into account vulnerability. In other words, hazards like extreme floods or storms really don't have to become disasters if we have the right systems and structures in place. So this points to the need for more systematic and extensive disaster risk reduction tools and warnings that reach every individual needs and enables us to work across silos to reach everyone. And this is where really public-private partnerships can provide a lot of value, filling in gaps where the government, perhaps in certain countries, cannot fill, to ensure, that there is preparedness and resilience to reach every individual and their needs. We also found that the efforts are more effective when they address national, subnational, and community levels in a harmonized and coordinated way. And again, with this respect, companies such as Everbridge and the private sector can come in to kind of fill or provide some of that coordination or fill certain gaps at certain levels, perhaps at the subnational or national level. And then lastly, one of the final takeaways is that governments and organizations and private sector can all, better enhance disaster risk preparedness through collaboration and knowledge sharing. And this graphic shows how early warning processes and preparedness can be made more effective by joining up different actors and working across silos to address risk, vulnerability, and hazard from a bottom-up, but also top-down approach to really ensure that not only all of the activities and actions span the different hazards and risks, but also the vulnerability needs of all individuals. So it provides a more systematic and inclusive approach to DRR. And getting into kind of the bulk of our topic of resilience, we found that each country or each case study approaches resilience differently, of course, and that is based on their context, what they face, the risks, the hazards, but also political and cultural background and dynamics are at play. And of course, the way in which they provide indicators and benchmarks of success differ. And this guides the regulatory regulatory frameworks and policies that they put in place to deal with those. In all three of the countries, we really first see the emergence of environmental policies that then over time shift towards resilience. And we found that in countries that take a broad-based approach to hazards and resilience, which I'll get to in the next slide, are better able to adapt and deal with emerging and new risks, and of course, changing risks. The COVID-19 pandemic really, and subsequent impacts of that really showed that the need for a broad-based approach to hazards and multi-hazards, multi-risk systems. This is kind of in line with the 2023 Global Status of Multi-Hazard Early Warning Systems that UNDRR and WMO published, that in which they found that 95% of the countries that reported having a national disaster risk reduction strategy also reported the existence of a multi-hazard early warning system, and found that countries that do have these more comprehensive strategies and integrate, long-term climate adaptation and resilience showed a better coverage of warning systems in dealing with disasters. So as we mentioned before, and the other panelists mentioned, that we chose 3 of these key markets for their advances in DRR and their public warning systems. As Lorenzo mentioned, Japan has long been at the forefront of disaster risk reduction efforts and has one of the most robust technologically advanced warning systems in the world based on satellite broadcasts. Equally, the US has a comprehensive cell broadcasting system that's emulated now throughout the world, including the European Union, which is now required to operate and develop a public warning system under EU law. And their EU cross-border alert system aims to kind of integrate warnings across all of the 27 member states. However, Marley will explain how this actually works in practice in the next section. So Japan has served as a model for best practices in the implementation and management of disaster resilience frameworks. And their policies tend to operate on a voluntary compliance basis, which means that local governments are not required to comply with government resilience policies, but the cornerstone of their strategy is really to maintain a strong framework for the protection of life and economic prosperity in the event of disaster. So preparedness is a key tenet of their resilience strategy. And they view and they define resilience in terms of societal and economic resilience. And they also have a strong component of the prevention of cascading multi-hazard strategy, which is particularly important in the Japanese case, where the risk of cascading or compound disasters are high. And so here's a list of policies that have been instrumental in Japan and have led to its strengths in having a unified national approach to DRR. And one of the other key strengths that they have is they have a very long-term approach to DRR, which is really a best practice in the field, as I mentioned, because it provides focus on long-term vulnerability and climate adaptation and action. However, some of the major gaps or concerns that we found for Japan is their rapidly aging population. When we speak about vulnerability and older elderly people living in places with high hazard risks, really taking into consideration how to coordinate and integrate technology with a population that might not necessarily have technology as their main source of information. And then when we get to the European Union, they use a recovery and resilience scoreboard to measure each country's ability to deal with potential hazards. And their definition or approach to resilience is a little bit more broad-based, focused on institution, infrastructure, the environment, and societal resilience as well. So they have kind of a more comprehensive approach to resilience that includes now the green and digital transition with the Green New Deal. And the EU has taken steps to define and promote global resilience as well. Their key strengths is now trying to find a unified approach across all of their member states, and having cross-border coordination between different countries in the case of, larger scale hazards. And they have very robust monitoring capabilities, as I mentioned, with the scoreboard, and with Marley will speak also about the EU alert system. Some of their gaps, however, and challenges that we found is that meeting some of their ambitious climate goals and transition goals, which really is the case for many countries right now, and also inconsistency with implementing regulations across member states and how to deal with non-adherence with certain countries. So that's something that the EU really will need to kind of think about for the next few years and decades. And then lastly, when we get to the US, they have a very different approach to resilience compared to Japan and the EU. Their focus on resilience is institutional infrastructure and economic resilience, but it's really with kind of the 2017 National Security Strategy, really focused on also human-induced hazards, deliberate terrorist attacks, unconventional stresses and shocks and threats to the nation's economy and security. So unlike in Japan and the EU, the US strategy on resilience is really tied to national security and defense. But their strength is their innovative cell broadcasting system in warnings. And they've had some successes, but also some challenges with their emergency action plans, and setting up FEMA, for example, has helped to deal with those challenges. And one of the other challenges they have is the political buy-in of certain states and competing interests between states who do want a more longer-term strategy for climate adaptation and other states who perhaps value economic resilience over environmental and sustainability issues. So I provided a very brief overview of the resilience strategies and policies, and Marley will now take the floor and speak specifically on warning systems in each of the 3 countries. Thank you.
So hello, everyone, and I'm thrilled to be with you virtually today. Thank you, Miriam, for starting our presentation. My name is Marley Taylor, and I'm a current master's student at Johns Hopkins University, and I'm an intern with Everbridge. And it's my work with Everbridge and with Lorenzo that has really made this project get to where it is today. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank everyone at Everbridge and the University College London Warning Research Center on getting us here tonight. Okay, so with that in mind, I will talk more about the specifics of our research in regards to public warning systems. So if you look at this slide, our research set out to create a kind of map of public warning, both to show what kind of systems are in operation in a few key markets, as well as to help us understand the legislative framework that got us to where we are today. So as Miriam said, we basically examined a lot of legislation and a lot of government websites to kind of understand where we are with public warning today. I will briefly take you through the alert systems in Japan, the European Union, and the United States, and introduce a few examples from our report that we think illustrate which areas still need work with regards to alert systems. Can we get the next slide, Miriam? Thank you. Okay, so the Japanese public warning system, J-Alert, you can see an example on the screen. As Miriam said, is a satellite broadcasting system operated by the Japan Meteorological Agency for natural disasters and the Fire and Disaster Management Agency for armed attacks. Japan reached 100% coverage with J-Alert in 2016, and alerts can be disseminated between 4 and 20 seconds across the country, which is pretty incredible. However, in reality, it's not always that fast, and we'll discuss this when we talk a little bit more in detail about some of the different kinds of hazards that they have in Japan. Can we have the next slide? Thank you. So Japan is a particularly interesting case, kind of as we've discussed, because they're at risk of disasters basically all the time with earthquakes and tsunami. But also in recent years, armed attacks have become a big issue on the minds of policymakers as North Korea has been testing its missile capabilities. So I was actually living in Japan when North Korea had its first successful launch over the island of Japan. It was the northern part of the island. And I remember getting the alert on my phone and kind of panicking because I had training in what to do for a tsunami and for earthquakes, but I had no idea what to do in the event of a missile launch. And I think a lot of people in the country felt that way. At the time, we just really weren't prepared for it. So Japan has taken some steps to try and train people for what to do in this kind of event. But this also brings up a problem for their system as it stands today, as you can kind of see on the screen there with some of these news headlines. Japan's public warning system needs to be incredibly fast. When you think about earthquakes, you really just have seconds between the alert going off and the earthquake hitting. So you have to be able to get a message out really quickly, and people need to be able to respond quickly. But when we look at something like a missile attack, you have to choose between accuracy and speed, or at least that's how the government kind of sees it today, because they essentially chose speed over accuracy the first time a missile was launched, and people were a bit annoyed that they got an alert, but the missile didn't actually go over their part of the country. And in a later missile launch, they chose accuracy over speed, and people were upset that it took them as long as 5 minutes to get an alert out. So if it takes 5 minutes to get an alert out, people really might not be able to protect themselves should a missile actually hit Japan. So this is really something that the government is facing, and it's a serious challenge, as they're still kind of trying to find the sweet spot between the best amount of accuracy and the timeliest dissemination method. All right, next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So next, looking at the European Union, we found that resilience in the EU generally falls into 4 categories, which includes infrastructure protection, system resilience, public warning, and civil protection, which includes both disaster risk reduction and relief. So as Miriam mentioned, this really relies on coordination and solidarity, which is an important part of resilience in the EU. And this operates through the EU Civil Protection Mechanism, which has the responsibility of managing disaster relief and focuses on the bloc's collective capacity to mitigate and recover from disaster. So cross-border disaster efforts and disaster mitigation efforts are a really key part of the EU's alert and disaster management strategy. So you can see on the screen a few different EU alert systems. So EU Alert is kind of the generic name for public warning systems in the European Union, and most of them have relatively easy to recognize names. I put one of my favorite ones up here, which is the system for Belgium, which luckily for them is B Alert, which is just very easy to remember and very handy. So under Article 110 of the European Electronic Communications Code, all EU member states should operate a public warning system. And the deadline for that was 2022. So it simply has not been met by every member state yet. Northern Europe and Western Europe are the best off in this case, but we still see that Southern and Eastern Europe are lagging behind. So can we look at the next slide, please? Okay. So looking at our map here, which we made based on the BEREC database on public warning systems, and then confirmed through follow-up research that we conducted on each individual member state, we can see that Hungary, Ireland, and Cyprus are the last 3 member states without an adequate early warning system, according to the guidelines set out by the European Public Warning Service. So you can see those in red. And then we also highlight in orange countries that are using systems with alternate technology, and in blue systems that are based on cell broadcast, which, as Dave said, we believe to be the most effective system for reaching people in a timely manner and also for accuracy. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so as you can see here, overall, the European Union is quite close to meeting its goal, albeit a few years late at this point. So this categorization of states, just for your reference, because we have Western, Southern, Northern, and Eastern Europe here. This is for the UN Geoscheme for Europe Convention. So that means that Germany would be in Western Europe, not in Northern Europe, just in case there's any differences. So it might not be the standard way that you define Europe, but it's basically the UN definition. So as we can see, Western Europe has already met the requirement with about 100% countries implementing an adequate public warning system. We can see Southern Europe is not too far behind, and same for Northern Europe, but Eastern Europe still has a lot of work to do. However, it's important here not just to look at if there is a system in place, but what kind of system is in place. And our report really does that in detail, telling you which countries have cell broadcast systems, which use sirens, which use apps, and things like that. So in Northern and Eastern Europe, far fewer countries use cell broadcast systems. And that is notable because, unfortunately, all public warning systems are not equally effective. Of course, having any system is a good start, but many systems which use radio, sirens, things like that, may be cheaper to install and operate, but they don't necessarily have a good track record of reaching all citizens in a timely manner. Look at the next slide, please. Okay, so one example of this is Germany, which a few years ago had some really awful floods. And at the time, Germany was using an app called Nina, which you can see on the screen in orange. And so the Nina was operated by the Federal Office of Civil Protection and Disaster Assistance. And while the floods were happening, they did actually send out a lot of notifications to people. But the problem was that very few people had downloaded the app or registered. And so a lot of them simply weren't getting the notifications, even if they were being sent out. And the German government faced a significant amount of backlash for this. And in response, they actually became very proactive. So they switched to a cell broadcast-based system. And that one doesn't require users to register to receive alerts. And they also implemented an annual warning day to help residents prepare for hazards. So there are still many member states like Luxembourg and Italy, for example, who are in the process of transitioning to cell broadcast systems, which don't require registration. And this is a trend in a positive direction that they're working on this. I think we all know from personal experience that when we're asked to take an additional step or download something on our phone or register, a lot of us are unlikely to do that. And that's why cell broadcast is a really excellent system, because it doesn't ask people to register. It just ensures that they get the message when they're at risk of a hazard. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so last we'll talk about the United States. So disaster management in the US goes through the US Federal Emergency Management Agency, also known as FEMA, which was created in 1979. And following the September 11th terrorist attacks, the Department of Homeland Security, the DHS, was created, and FEMA was reorganized to be part of the DHS. In the US, there is a lot of disagreement about whether FEMA was more effective when it was its own agency or if it's more effective as part of DHS. But a significant number of studies have found that FEMA's loss of autonomy has made it harder for the agency to respond to disasters. So that's a serious challenge that the US still faces. Because FEMA is part of DHS, resilience policy in the US as Miriam said, is uniquely tied to the country's military and defense apparatus. And that's why we see resilience defined in a national security strategy. Let's see. Alerts in the US, like in the EU, operate on 2 levels, although it's a little bit different. So for the EU, it's member states, and for the US, we have our national system and our state system. So to examine state level systems, we focused on a few states that were prone to natural disasters and made sure there was representation on both sides of the political aisle. So we looked at California, New York, Florida, Louisiana, and Hawaii. Because the US has an overarching national alert system, which is the integrated public alert and warning system, it's a little bit different from the EU. And that system came about in 2006 following an executive order in the United States. And so this system is used for things like our kind of US's famous Amber Alerts, which are now being replicated across the world. That's for America's missing children, essentially. Most states also operate some kind of public warning system, which complements the national system. And these state level systems typically send alerts via an app or SMS messaging. So one example of this in the US is Hawaii. And this is an example of the importance of using warning systems when hazards occur. So a few years ago, there were really bad fires in Hawaii, and more than 1,000 buildings were destroyed, more than 2,000 people had to evacuate, and 1,000 people remained unaccounted for, with nearly 100 people dead. And the fires knocked out emergency and cell services, so people were really unaware of what was happening until it was too late. First responders and emergency management officials couldn't communicate in a timely manner. And in the end, the head of the emergency management system or agency did not activate the siren system. This is essentially because Hawaii's siren system lacks the flexibility to be used for multiple types of hazards, as it was only designed for tsunami. So he was afraid that if he used the system, people might run inland towards the fire and be in more danger. At the same time, the system simply wasn't fast enough. So the speed of the fire couldn't be matched by the speed of Hawaii's alert system. And this really shows why we need our alert systems to be flexible and timely and accurate. And Hawaii's system, unfortunately, didn't meet these requirements. Okay, last slide, please. Okay, so as Mary and I have outlined here, modern resilience policies are built on environmental and climate policies. And all 3 cases examined here have built really substantial resilience frameworks and are in the process of strengthening their public warning systems and making alterations to ensure that the best possible outcomes are available when they're used. However, looking to the future, each case shows us that there is still a lot more work to be done. The Japanese government, as Miriam said, need to focus on vulnerability needs for their rising elderly population. They also need to figure out how they can balance the need for a timely and accurate warning system. The European Union needs to ensure that they have parity across their member states and that no state is left without an inadequate public warning system or without the resources for disaster recovery. The US has a national public warning system, but there are still gaps at the state level which need to be rectified. Early warning systems have proven to be effective, reliable, and cost-efficient solutions to protecting lives and livelihoods from hazards. But our systems must be constantly monitored, tested, and updated. And people need training in what to do when there is a hazard so they can properly respond and protect themselves. And these 3 cases that have shown that even though great progress has been made, there's still a lot of work to be done. Yes, so thank you for everyone for listening, and that's the end of our presentation. Thanks.
I'm not sure if you can hear the clapping, but thank you very much, Mariam and Marley, for such a great overview of the report, which I have a copy here. So please do take a download and read. It's a lovely bedtime reading for you all. It's got all the details in there. It's a really great report. So thank you very much. Right, I shall just change the view on here to gallery so that we can see everybody. But now we'd just like to take this opportunity to do questions and answers. So if anyone online wants to ask a question, please pop it into the Q&A on the chat, and then we can ask our experts and so on. And if anyone on the floor has any questions, please let us know. We've got a question here from A. Latif. I would like to know, as these early warning systems in all the 3 countries are aligned with early warning for all. So I think that's if all of these warning systems are aligned with the early warning for all initiative. Mariam or Marley, do you have anything to add?
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, these are some of the best early warning systems in the world, and some of the most influential. So I would actually say that now what the Early Warning for All project aims to do is get systems like the cell broadcast system or a satellite system to every country. So yeah, yes, is the short answer.
Okay, Valerie, did you want to add anything to that?
No, Marley's correct. What these 3 examples do is show what the developed countries of the world have put in place to protect themselves. I think early warning for all is all about taking that intelligence and asking the developed world to help support the 140 developing countries that are impacted by climate and other types of events and need that support both financially and with that learning to help them protect their citizens in the same way. So they're leading the way, but early warning for all is helping us to bring everybody else up to that same standard and catch up.
Brilliant, thanks. I'll just take one more online and then we'll come to the floor. So we've got one more question here from Dan Haynes. Thank you very much. This is a fascinating talk. I've just downloaded the report. My question is, how much do we know about people's behavior when they receive warnings? In other words, were you able to factor psychology into your research? And if so, were there significant cultural differences between regions? So I'll hand that over to Marley and to Mariam.
Thank you, Dan, for your question. That's actually a great question and something that at the Warning Research Center we focus on. As a social scientist myself, I think that the behavioral aspect is really important, how people are aware of risks, how they perceive risks, how they then perceive warnings, how you're able to communicate warnings given different languages, given different cultural backgrounds. Of course, and given different perceptions of risk in general. So that's what we focus on generally at the Warning Research Center. However, this report really focused on policy and regulatory frameworks, but I think it would be a great addition, an add-on to do as a secondary report to look at how this kind of ties into the human or people aspect of cultural differences between different case studies. Thank you.
It's a very tricky area, and I think there's also a lot of research that is needed in that area. So it's a huge area of growth, essentially. So we're going to take a couple of questions from the floor. So just one here, and then we'll come over here. So this is just for the audience online, so they can hear you.
Hiya, thank you so much for your talk. And I was wondering about the role of decision makers in issuing the alert. So you gave a couple of examples there where, say in Hawaii, the decision was taken not to because of an understanding of what action individuals might take, or in Japan where they had to make that very quick decision between speed over accuracy. So I was wondering, do you think that we are likely to see an evolution towards automation of that decision? Or will there always be a need for some level of human understanding of human behavior?
Okay, great question. I shall just put the audio on for our online guests.
That's a great question. We actually, with Everbridge, have been working for a little bit over a year on a chatbot, AI-powered chatbot. Now, the technology can be developed. I don't think it's a technological issue. The application is something that is a bit more complex at this stage for several reasons. You know, first is the most obvious one when talking with practitioner. If you send out, you know, distress signal and you get answered by a chatbot and something wrong happens, so you might get stuck somewhere, or whose fault is that? Where does the liability lie to? So that's from, you know, some countries, and Italy is a good example of that. They're very cautious about how liable the government can be, or the state can be, or the first responders can be on those issues. The second part is more related to data. In order to have a chatbot that really delivers, even if it's AI, you need large, you know, macro databases, basically, large number of data. But we are talking about emergencies. We're talking about very, how can I say, intimate to an extent kind of databases that you don't want to share, and governments clearly pay a lot of attention. So to feed the machine, we have been working through surveys, more traditional ways, but the training side of machine learning has yet to be implemented in a way in which you could have a really powerful tool in hands. But technology is going in that direction. There is, you know, a debate. Is it good? Is it not? The reality is that technologically, at the moment, it can be done. Will it be done? I don't know. I know that our vice president here and some of our main representatives knows where there is a real interest in finding these ways to put, you know, into the market this kind of technology, but we are still working on it. Val, would you like to add something?
Hi, hello again. I think the answer to your question is it's always going to be a bit of both, because even today, there are standard operating procedures, there are messages, there are protocols, there are different levels of message alert, like in the US, it might be presidential. There is a mixture of guardrails that technology provides, and that's that planned route for any message to be created and sent and to where. It's sort of planned and embedded in, but there'll always be a person that has to make that judgment based on the guardrails. Well, I hope so anyway, for the foreseeable future. As Lorenzo said, things like chatbots that can give people more information if they press a link, create that better two-way communication quickly, that will enhance the experience. But always it will be a judgment call within guardrails. But while I'm alive anyway, I hope.
I was going to say, in the case of other warning systems not done through cell broadcasting, those that are automated are generally checked by a human as well at some point. So there's very few completely automated systems except for earthquakes. But then, you know, within 45 seconds whether you're right or not. So yeah, so it is, at the moment, if it is automated, that can help, but then it's usually verified by a human who's on duty or some, you know, some kind of role. So that's generally how it works. So I assume it would probably, you know, be the same within the cell broadcasting. But we've seen from Hawaii, obviously, there's some issues involved in that, and the various legal procedures that it takes to stand down various warnings as well can be challenging. So do we have another question? I'll take one more question on the floor, then one online, and then we'll come back to Anna.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone and the authors as well for doing sort of this in-depth analysis. I'm Peniel, and I'm one of the master students at IIDR. And we had a conversation around sort of in the behavioral aspect of things as well, where when is a warning system or a warning sort of an alert versus an awareness purpose or an informed, like giving someone information. And so the example we had about Hawaii, where the sirens would have alerted people that something was going on, but it would not have informed them, and it wouldn't have given them the right kind of information based already on predisposed knowledge, I guess, on what to do. And so when we look at the policy as well as the implementation, do we see sort of a difference of where more resources are being spent into as much information as possible, or just alerting people where it's just like a flooding, be alert, or flooding, do not take certain routes, or flooding, stay at home, etc. Like how much more like extra layers do we see being added onto these systems, given that these 3 countries are already kind of advanced, and so they're not building from scratch, but are now trying to cover that last 20% of information as well as communities as well?
That's a really good question. I'm very happy to answer that. Does anyone online does Mariam or Marley want to add anything first?
You can start, Karina, and we can add on. Thank you.
Really good question. Yes, so warnings and alerts. So and awareness, they're all kind of intertwined really. So most research indicates that alert levels are part of a warning system. So an alert would be there essentially to raise that flag and say, actually, you need to do something or you need to pay attention to new information. The warning system is much broader in terms of being set up before, having the preparedness activities, making sure everybody knows how to respond to that warning. Because obviously, once you get that warning, if you don't know how to respond, it's a bit futile, right? And even it might be that you know that you need to respond, but you can't, you don't have the capacity to, right? There's nowhere to evacuate to, there is no structure, or you have some kind of disability, or you're marginalized, or you're in a refugee camp or whatever. So very, very challenging context. So in a way, the alert is the signal to say, you need to be aware. So the awareness and the alert is kind of tied in, but the warning is probably part of the whole broader process that people know how to act, because people often look at alert levels, for example, or an alert with a siren. It's just one sound, it's one icon, it's one color number. It cannot represent everything. So you'll need all of these other things like information bulletins from either the scientists who are explaining the phenomenon, or the government if it's some kind of terrorist activity and so on, who would then advise as to what that information is, to kind of put that into context. So that's kind of where the relationship between them lies, I think. And so the challenge really with cell broadcasting is it is essentially an alert, because you get the alert on your phone, but it's also part of a warning system, because there's no point in getting an alert on your phone if you don't know what to do about it. But equally, if you don't have the alert, you don't have a chance. So yeah.
How they build on more information into their systems to the alert, so that it goes beyond just an alert and it has information for someone who might not get those bulletins, or tourists, etc.
Okay. Okay, Valerie. Yeah.
Michael. Okay, sorry, I'm Val, by the way, and I run the public safety practice for Everbridge globally. So this is what I do every day with lots of countries around the world. So sorry for butting in, but look, as Karina's quite rightly said, this is a whole ecosystem, and I know Dave talked about it before. Do you know something's happening? So if that's weather related, it might be sensor based and stuff. So have you got intelligence that something's happening on the ground in advance? It may be a long way in advance. It may be short term in advance. But have you got those systems in place? When you've got those systems, do you have a plan? Have you prepared your emergency responders, your citizens? Japan's very interested, and they train all of their school children to know exactly what to do when an alert happens. Culturally, they're very rules-based and will follow the rules. Not all countries will. That's where the culture thing comes in. Have you got a plan? When that plan is instigated, do people know what to do? How do they respond? And that's multi-layered. So they talk about multi-channel warning and alert systems. So mobile-based is one, sirens. In the Netherlands, they have bus, bulletin boards. It might be the chatbot idea where you get a link and you get further information. There are other systems that are two-way, which give more a richness of information when they're sent. Cell broadcast is brilliant. It's like a loaded gun. When it goes, you need to take action, but there are different layers and levels of information, as you asked. So if you know about it, you've planned for it, you've communicated and prepared people, you're able to execute a response, recover more quickly, and then learn from it. That's the optimum cycle that we're always trying to talk about when we talk about the ecosystem. So hopefully that helps. Want to add anything, Michael?
No, I was just going to say, in terms of the tourists, what's really good about cell broadcasting is that it will push out to any mobile phone wherever you're from. So if you happen to be in Japan and you were hiking a volcano and there was some kinds of activity, you would get that message, even though your phone's registered somewhere else, and it would come through in your language. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you'll get that information in a form that you will understand because it's set through the language of your phone. So it's an incredibly powerful tool because, you know, quite often scientists want to be able to reach tourists, but they can't because people haven't necessarily downloaded the national app, as we saw in Germany. So this way, it's like, it doesn't matter. If you're in the area of a threat, you will get that message. So for example, I recently landed in the USA when I was transitioning to Guatemala. And as soon as I landed at the airport, I turned my phone on. I got one of those amber alerts telling me that a child had been kidnapped and they were, you know, trying to find it. So it was really fascinating how that came through, you know, just straight away on my phone. And everyone was talking about it on the plane. So it was quite cool. But yeah, from that sense, it's very good to give very urgent information to people who are very directly at threat. And they can then use that appropriately. So it's a very, very powerful tool, especially for these very rapid hazards. So we've got here a question online: can technology create new vulnerability? And this kind of also ties in here about one of the root causes of vulnerability to disaster is strongly linked to social issues. Why use technology to solve a social problem? So there we go. So good questions. And I think that, so I'm just going to start that and then I'll pass on to the others. But I think just to kind of feed on from what I said, you know, we have to use redundancy. That is absolutely critical when we're doing warning. So we have to use lots of different channels, lots of different types of technology, and lots of different types of non-technology. And this raises a challenge because we need to make sure that they're all saying the same thing, that they're not saying different things, because that can create confusion. But at the same time, it needs to, we need to have that redundancy in place if technology does fail. So that is kind of the vulnerability that sometimes in disasters, we can get that technology failure, if not directly from the hazard event itself, which might destroy electrical infrastructure and so on. We might get it from a cascading event like we saw through the NATEC disaster in Fukushima in 2011. So it can have these knock-on effects of then electricity was, you know, really limited in responding to the crisis. So we get all these different situations that create vulnerability. So yes, technology can create new vulnerability. You know, we can have cyber attacks, we can have all these different things. Your battery could run out. You know, I remember being in a car accident. It's the only time ever my phone had run out of battery in my entire life. It's just irony, right? Well, isn't it ironic, as Alanis Morissette would say? You know, these things do happen, but that's where we need to have that redundancy in place, because when technology works, it's brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic, and it can really save people's lives. So thank you for that question, anonymous attendee. And just to go to Edwin's question, you know, why use technology to solve a social problem is quite right, in the sense that social warnings are inherently social. They're an inherently social process. Hazards and disasters are an inherently social process. But technology can help us massively. We saw in the Christchurch earthquake in 2011, so this is way before cell broadcasting was in the public realm anyway, might have been in the secret realms of military or whatever. But, you know, people were using that, were using Twitter, were using GIS to say, you know, hey, I've got running water, I've got a kitchen, I've got a toilet that you can use. Here are some photos of the damage. And then the emergency managers and the government could see what was going on. They could prioritize where they wanted to respond. So this is looking more at the respond rather than the preparedness element, but technology has a role to play in every single element, and it can be incredibly useful. So I would say, you know, yes, the problems are social, but technology can be used to help us. And it's really important that we embrace that, but we understand the limitations of it as well. Does anyone else want to give an answer to that? Marley, Mariam? Nope. They're saying nope. Lorenzo? Good. Okay, right. Okay, so we will then move on to Robert Goldhammer. Hi, Bob. It was a great overview of what's taken place in the USA, Japan, and the EU. What data do you have on other areas around the world where the work is really needed? Who wants to take this one?
Hello, Bob. If you're there, hello. There is a lot of data that's being created around the rest of the world. So Africa, Asia Pacific, South America. The ITU and the UN are, oh, sorry, am I shouting? Oh, sorry, yeah. A camera, oh no. Okay. I hate speaking into cameras, but I'll give it a go. So there is a lot of mapping going on of the other 202 countries that need support from early warning across APAC, across Africa, across South America, including all the small independent developing states and islands. So the UN, the ITU are working with institutions such as UCL to map out the requirements, and each geography has its own unique challenges, as we know. So there's been a lot of work on Africa, which is all about infrastructure and how can you get the messages out there. Latin America has some different issues and they're very socially based. APAC is just a very disparate and very hazard-ridden place. So that data is being collated. It does, you know, it exists in Everbridge because we've mapped all 202 countries and their state of preparedness. We're working with ITU, who are really leading the charge to do workshops at country and governmental levels all around the world to get their view of where they are and to help them understand what the collective intelligence of these communities, you know, communities such as this one bring to the party as well. So it's not as full a picture as we'd like, Bob, but it's a work in progress that we're putting a lot of effort into as a whole ecosystem. And some interesting insights if you want to reach out that we'd be happy to share.
Thank you very much, Valerie. So we've got just two last questions here. So have there been any considerations to how public warning systems might be affected by, for example, space weather, which might disrupt the system? In this instant, are there any redundancies to public warning systems since cell broadcasting may be affected by satellite issues? Mariam?
Yes, thank you, Karina. I'll let the tech experts maybe take the second part of that question in terms of redundancies and how space weather issues can affect satellite issues and cell broadcasting. But I just wanted for your questions because it really highlights the need for broadening our understanding of hazards and definitions of the types of risks that we face in the first place. So, and space is one of them, which is now slowly coming into a lot of the classifications. So about 2 years ago, UNDRR published their very comprehensive, broad hazard classification list that includes 815 hazards. And this, of course, includes natural and meteorological hazards, but physical hazards, human-induced hazards, but also space weather issues, as you mentioned. And I think it's important when we are thinking about these different types of new or emerging hazards that we also think about kind of the cascading or multi risk issues that I had mentioned. and thinking about, first you need to understand the hazard. So for example, solar flares, and then look at kind of the cascading impacts that such a hazard or event could have on our, of course, infrastructures, our technology, our information systems. So we're really trying to now in the field think of multi-hazard preparedness and response, but it is really a new topic. So maybe Lorenzo, I don't know if you've thought about the second part of that question of how it affects cell broadcasting.
Well, yes, clearly, and the question probably is not like there is a difference between cell broadcast and satellite technology. Cell broadcast go through cell towers, satellite goes through guess what? So there are might be issues because cell towers can get down, but there are two different technologies and they can work as redundancies. So one, if there is an issue, you can integrate one with the other. I don't want to say too much because the next question, and I'd like Marley to take it because she has worked on it for a while with me, is based on the report finding is cell broadcast or satellite warning system better? I think Marley, you have an answer. At Everbridge, we found an answer to this question. So I'd like Marley to explain why.
He's really testing my knowledge here. Are we online? Okay, so again, the short answer would be, as I think is kind of made evident by how we framed our findings in the report, that we really see cell broadcast technology as the preferable technology to be used for public warning systems. And I think one of the important things to talk about with cell broadcast technology is that even if, for example, the system is overloaded and there's a lot of messages going back and forth, that those alert messages get priority over all other messages. So even when there's a lot of traffic and it's congested, those are the first messages to go out and they're the first ones to be received. And I think that's really critical when you're talking about events like an earthquake where seconds really matter. So that's one of the main reasons why we really prefer cell broadcast technology. It's the timeliest, it's the easiest to target people without tracking them. So it's what's the word, passive system. So you're not tracking people's location constantly to find them and send them a message, but they're getting a message because they're in the vicinity of the nearest cell tower to that particular hazard or disaster area. So I think those are two really critical points for why we prefer cell broadcast technology over something like satellite.
Well, just now to conclude this session, we would like to give our Vice President of Public Safety, Valerie Risk, just a couple of minutes to conclude with her own remarks that will bring the conversation we had all together. Let me just remind you, download the report, come and email us, try to find our contacts. Karina knows where to reach, if needed. We are here to talk, and very important, after Val's remark, there's going to be a little bit of food as far as I understand. So stay, chat with us, and have a little food. You need to go there.
We're here. Hi. Okay, I'm being followed by the camera. Just a quick thing to add. Satellite doesn't work indoors. So cell broadcast does, just about that. But the important thing for me is, in old days, they set fires, or they banged drums, or they rang bells, or they shouted. They had alert systems. Today, we've got a multitude of different options that support getting vital messages to people when they need them. My summary, and you've heard some really good analysis, is that the important thing is that we have an ecosystem that runs end to end, that involves continents, countries, corporate bodies, communities, and citizens in this call to action. I think every day about how do I get those messages from 2 billion people to 8 billion people? Well, it's people like you that are going to help me do that. because when we understand the issues and when we collectively communicate them and use our collective intelligence, that's when we'll get people to put in the policy that actually creates the call to action and get some of these things into everyday practice. And when we do, we will really save lives and livelihoods. Quite interesting, someone was asking earlier, what motivates people to act? Sometimes it's actually thinking about what you do in an emergency situation, protect your dog. That gets really, really high engagement from people, especially in Europe. If it's your livestock, that gets high engagement in Africa. So it's understanding people, because people are at the heart of this, and what motivates them and how we get them to take that action to sort of keep safe and to keep their community safe. So my request is spread the word, help us create this ecosystem. And I'm sorry for the guys that won't get food who are online, but maybe next time. And thank you to UCL and thank you to the researchers, because I'm asked everywhere I go, what can we learn from other countries? And now I've got a brilliant report that's going to help me answer that question much more effectively. So thank you. Thank you so much, guys, for what you've done.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you to Everbridge for working with us. We love working with you guys. Thank you so much for your input. And we're really, really happy to be able to use academia to help, you know, enhance people's lives and increase people's safety, which is what we all do academic research for in this field. So that's really great. So for those of you online, unfortunately, we cannot give you the wine and the snacks through the internet, but thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you online very soon for our future events. But for those of you here, if you'd like to join us next door, we have got a bit of a wine reception and some canapes, so please do take the opportunity to have a chat and share some ideas, and thanks everyone for coming today, and thanks again to all at Everbridge and our wonderful authors for creating this report. So thank you very much.